Welcome to the show. It is Sandy and Shawn. That's Sandy Clough on my right. I'm Shawn Drotar. Danny Bailey producing as always. Welcome to the program. And Sandy will start, of course, after this long weekend of bad news for Colorado sports after the Avalanche and Nuggets get dispatched from the playoffs. The truth of the matter is you have to start turning things around and getting a plan for what you will do next. And for the Colorado Avalanche, they have a lot of players they need to deal with because after their core was set for the last couple of years, they have been trying to assemble bits and pieces, guys on one-year deals, veterans trying to make trades and a lot of moves. They did that at the deadline. But now, of course, they have to deal with the ramifications of that and figure out who stays, who goes, and who can they afford to keep.
Yes, and those decisions might not seem as complicated as those confronting the Nuggets, but they still exist. And to me, it starts with Jonathan Drouin, who is an unrestricted free agent, and continues with perhaps Casey Middlestat, who is a restricted free agent. Both are guys who were brought in this season, Drouin for the entire season, Middlestat after the trade deadline, and contributed well and are young enough to be part of the Avalanche core from years to come.
Well, let's start with Middlestat, because in some regards he may be the most in demand, and he is a restricted free agent. If anybody in the last year, if you haven't, by the way, saw the Saving Sakic ESPN film, that's terrific, by the way, if you hadn't had a chance to check it out. The money is way more than it used to be back then. But the reality is when you have restricted free agents and they're 25 years old, like Casey Middlestat, they may end up being in demand. Middlestat, in the 11 playoff games in which the Avs played, had 9 points. He had the three goals, the 6 assists, and finds himself in a pretty enviable spot for a guy in his first playoffs. Appeared to find himself rather comfortable, seemed to get better as the series went on. And to my mind, while Jonathan Drouin is really important, he's closer to 30. I would like to see the Avs get Middlestat done ASAP. I think they're going to get them both done, but I think we probably agree in Middlestat, when they traded for him, in that 1-for-1 with Bowen Byram with Buffalo, they knew what it was going to cost roughly, and the Avalanche have probably already planned for that.
Well, I think they pay him what they were paying Bo Byram. That's what I think they do, and that's right around $4 million a year. That's a considerable raise from 2.5 for someone in his mid-20s who just played in his first playoff round. I think he's deserving of that kind of deal. He is not going to break the bank. He is not going to get a $5 million a year deal. No. He's not going to get a $6 million a year deal from anybody. And he seemed to enjoy his first playoff experience this year. Probably ended a little sooner than he had hoped, but that was the case for every player on the roster. And I would think that in exchange for perhaps accepting a longer-term deal, he would take less money on a per-season basis and stay with a playoff team. A team that's guaranteed of making the playoffs for years and years to come.
And when you talk about Byram, and that is interesting, Byram makes $3.85 million next year, and Byram will be 23 next year. Middlestat is 25, and that will be the last year of Byram's deal before he becomes a restricted free agent, because the Avalanche gave him almost immediately a short little bridge contract and bought out some of those years.
A bridge contract.
Yeah.
Maybe that's in store for Casey
Middlestat, in case things continue to come around.
But I would lengthen the term
works out
as a matter of negotiation.
I would for the Avalanche
term to keep the annual salary under control.
Yeah, and that may matter, and we've seen players do that. Obviously, when you're as young as Middlestat, and this is, it's not the NFL. Once you sign that, you get all of it. So as long as that number works out, I think Middlestat, the second the trade was made, I feel the die was cast. They're going to keep him. But I think if you're an Avs fan, you have to be more excited about keeping Middlestat today than you were at the time of the trade, because he seamlessly fit in, hit that 2-center spot, and did so with multiple wingers and looked good the whole time doing it. And I thought as the playoffs went along, he even looked better, and the best years are in front of him.
I can't add very much to that. I agree with it completely. I think that's the story. I think the Avs knew exactly what it would take to sign Casey Middlestat when they traded for him. Otherwise, you don't make the trade.
Yeah. Middlestat's agent, by the way, also represents a couple players on the Avs. So some of that communication might have even been a little, hit the golf course here and there. You hear things. They have an idea. Well, let's move on to your top choice, Jonathan Drouin, 29 years old. Obviously had a good year.
He'll get a bigger raise than Middlestat.
He probably will. And when you look at Drouin's year, obviously, it maybe took him a little while to get going with the team, and he certainly was better on Nathan McKinnon's line, his old teammate in juniors. But he was effective on his own. 19 goals for him this year. That's the best since the 2016-2017 season. 56 points in 79 games. That's nothing to sneeze at. We had talked about the idea that if Drouin got to 40 points on the year for the Avalanche when they signed him, it would be a bargain. He got to almost 60.
They'll live with that. That's Nazem Kadri territory.
It is.
Except for the career year that Kadri had here in 21-22 when he had 87 points. Otherwise, Nazem Kadri has been a 55 to 60 point scorer on a per year basis, virtually year in and year out. There has not been appreciable deviation from that range. His playoff history is a little more checkered, but during the regular season, he's actually been a very steady performer. In most years, with the exception of maybe 21-22, where he obviously overachieved, and he was great, and he was instrumental and indispensable to the Avalanche Stanley Cup run of 2022. But he had 1 year like that.
Yep.
And if you have someone, even on a first line, who's going to give you 60 points year in and year out, you're getting 100 plus from Rantanen. You're getting 120, 130, maybe more, 140 this year from McKinnon in a Hart Trophy type of season for McKinnon. If you've got a line that's going to give you 300 points, I don't care if one guy scores 60 and another guy scores 2.5 times that many. You get to 300 points on a line, that's a hell of a line. That's one of the best lines in the league, if not the best. And that's what they have with that particular line. And then I think from there, you're dealing with a tremendous amount of uncertainty as to how you reshape everything else. That's why I say Drouin comes first, because Drouin, to me, especially with McKinnon centering, belongs on that first line.
And do you have to pay him then?
Is good for the second line. He'll probably make more next year than Drouin makes next year, but I would expect both to be, again, in that 55 to 60 point per year range. That's 3/4 of a point per game. That's fine.
When you look across the league, the players that were on the standard non-rookie deals that cost less than $1 million. In other words, the veterans that are just trying to find a team, right? Drouin had 11 more points than any other player on that kind of deal. So he overperformed by any measurement whatsoever. He talked about it after the season, said, obviously it was a good year for me. Definitely took some steps forward towards my game and how I want to play. Credit to a lot of people here, from the coaching staff to the players. It's a hell of a group. And he's talked about wanting to come back.
And I want to add this. He was hurt late in the regular season. He couldn't play in the first round against Winnipeg. I know they lost in the second round, but when he came back, basically in the middle of the series, he played very well. He played very well. He wasn't a liability in any way, shape, or form. Unfortunately, the Avalanche didn't get as much production from maybe even McKinnon and Rantanen as they needed to beat Dallas. But Drouin, playing the bottom half of the series, played very close to his capabilities, if not even slightly above.
He had 3 points in 3 games. They were all assists, but that's a point a game. That's better than he did in the regular season.
And the power play, which was dry as the desert without him, came alive once he came back into the lineup and the power play became a factor for the Avalanche in extending the series beyond 5 games.
Well, let's look at a couple guys down the line, specifically down on that checking line, on that fourth line, that are unrestricted free agents, but players that I think we've talked about, and the stats may not be gaudy, but as you see from the loss to Dallas, the importance of depth and being able to be effective on all your lines, the longer the Stanley Cup playoffs roll along, becomes critical. So let's
you could argue Dallas won the series because Dallas's fourth line was so much better.
Yes, because they didn't have to overtax their top lines, and it let them play.
And they had guys on the third line who had people like Ed Olchuk doing commentary during the series, advocating that they be moved up to the second line or even the first.
Duchesne wasn't a top liner. Seemed pretty effective in that.
He was the best player, if not in the series, then certainly in the 7th game on either side.
So a couple depth guys. Let's start with Yakov Trenin, another player that was added near the deadline there. He's 27 years old, but out of the Avalanche's forwards in the 11 playoff games, only 6 Avalanche forwards actually had positive plus minuses. Trenin's was one of them. I mean, you've talked about him as being an important piece to bring back.
And Trenin getting hurt,
it really hampered their physicality. It may have
been a little thing, but little things cost you series.
Mm-hmm.
Even series that don't go the distance.
I thought he was their most physical forward by a significant margin.
And more importantly than what you and I think, Jared Bednar thought he was.
Yeah.
Jared Bednar thought he was ideally suited to fourth line duty.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And seemingly very happy with that role, comfortable with that role.
Sure.
And fit in that role. So that seems to be, especially when you're looking for the Avs, for guys that aren't expensive, that can solve the problems for you. Trenin may be one of those answers. Another one came at the trade deadline, and Brandon Duhaime came over from the Wild at 26 years old, 18 regular season games, only scored 5 points. But then again, we're talking about a guy that's out there primarily to play defense while at offense. But at the same time, we saw him punch in some points here and there. We saw him threaten a lot of times. A few times in this playoffs, Duhaime was inches away from goals. He's a pretty effective two-way player, even if the big points aren't there, and I think there's value.
I don't like him as a second-line winger.
No.
I love him as a fourth-line winger.
Right.
He brings an edge. He's not huge. He's not built like Nichushkin or Rantanen.
But he's 200 pounds.
But he's energetic. He is willing to engage physically. And again, I think as a fourth line player, he's excellent. And if things work out a certain way, I could see the Avalanche reassembling next year and hoping for better and healthier results from Colton, Wood, and O'Connor, which would leave Duhaime and Trenin on the fourth line. Who knows? Maybe Kovalenko. Maybe a young developing player who has a great training camp can fill that final spot, or a Joel Kiviranta could fill that final spot on the fourth line, especially if you have 2 guys in Trenin and Duhaime playing alongside him.
There will be other free agents, of course. They have to decide if Sean Walker has priced himself out of their ballpark, because they do have guys that might be able to replace him, but they have to make decisions on Jack Johnson. They have to talk about Andrew Cogliano, and these things will come along as the offseason continues.
Cogliano first has to decide whether he's going to retire or not, and that decision has not yet been forthcoming.
No.
We know Parise obviously is retiring.
And Johnson would like to play. So the Avs have some decisions to make. That's where you start, I think, with those 4 guys. So believe it or not, as we're talking about the Avs in the offseason, well, who's playing? Well, just one team locally is playing, the Colorado Rockies, and we'll get to them in a moment. But you can also be playing yourself. Get out on the course.
Well, it was raining when I came in today, and we're getting these late afternoon thunderstorms, which is great.
Just makes the greens predictable.
It's still time to get out and play golf, and the city of Denver has the perfect golf pass for you. Whether you're just getting started or played for decades, the Practice and Play Pass is for those new to the game to practice what they have learned and transition it onto the golf course. The Learn and Play Pass 1.0 is geared toward adult beginners, people who have never held a club, or players looking to advance their game. Or if you've been playing for a while, try the Learn and Play Pass 2.0, which is designed to be flexible for intermediate players looking to improve and fine-tune their game. You're just looking to have fun. The Friends and Family Pass lets you play mini golf or hit the driving range. You can bring up to 3 guests with you every single time with 8 unique courses and opportunities for all skill levels. Denver Golf is perfect for anyone. Learn more about everything related to Denver Golf and all it has to offer by visiting cityofdenvergolf.com. Come home to play. Denver Golf is your neighborhood course.
Well, when you get back from playing golf, you've got to eat, right? And maybe you're not ready to cook because you've been playing golf and you're going to hang out with the fellas. Okay, I get that. Warmer weather's here. Time to go outside, have some fun with friends. And we got the answer for you. It's our friends at Rolling Smoke Barbecue. You might want to entertain everyone at the house, but you need a break from the kitchen. Just what we were talking about. That's what you need and what you'll get from Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Whether you have a half dozen folks over or you're bringing over 50 or more for one of those big parties going on this spring, you can pick up the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 locations. They're in Aurora inside the Stanley Marketplace, where it all began. They're in Golden inside the Golden Mill at the corner of Dry Creek and University at Centennial. That's the one I go to. In fact, I was planning on ordering tonight, as a matter of fact, to get myself some barbecue. And now the newest location is open on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. And if you're headed to show at Red Rocks this summer, of course, rain or shine, the exceptions for giant hail and things like that, it's normally going, and you may want to eat there as well. Well, you can find them at Red Rocks as well. So you go up there, you don't have to worry about some of that questionable food that you're going to get up there. You can get fresh barbecue right up at Red Rocks from Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Rolling Smoke Barbecue online. You can order there as well at RollingSmokeBBQ.com. It is baseball season in Denver. It was baseball season in Denver when it started, but it's totally okay if you haven't been paying attention because the Avalanche and Nuggets were going, and the Rockies are 15-31. That's a winning percentage for those of you doing the quick math of 326. But here's the thing. They have been playing better of late, Sandy, and they're only 8 games out of the final wild card spot.
Good news and bad news. Good news, they've won 7 out of 10.
Yeah, there. Okay.
Bad news is that they've lost 3 straight after winning 7 in a row.
Okay.
A bit of good news. They aren't the worst team in baseball anymore. That designation belongs to the Chicago White Sox, but bad news, they are the worst team in the National League with a record of 15-31. Even the Marlins are a percentage point ahead of them.
And they are
at 16-33.
Buried in the West, obviously, behind the Dodgers.
Oh, they're only 16 games out, and they're only 6 games out of 4th place. No, I would. There's some sarcasm there, but the fact of the matter is, yes, they're only 3 games ahead of the pace set by the 1962 New York Mets, who finished 40-120, the worst modern era team in the history of baseball. That was the first year New York Mets, who went 40-120 for manager Casey Stengel. Obviously, 15-31 would equate to roughly that same record, but given their recent play and some individual hallmarks that have been developed, particularly on the part of Ryan McMahon over the course of the season so far, hard to imagine that the Rockies won't be able to win 35, maybe even 40 home games. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I don't think the Rockies will win a lot on the road, as the recent 3-game series in San Francisco helped to demonstrate, but I do think that they will end up in that 50-win to 52-win range, which will still be the worst season in the history of the franchise, even worse than last year's 59-103.
Yeah, it's obviously going to be ugly, and there are injuries they're dealing with. Kyle Freeland is injured. Chris Bryant is injured. Nolan Jones is injured. I mean, these are major cogs, and that doesn't count, of course, Herman Marquez, who's out expected for the majority of the season as well. So you're talking about some of the Rockies' very, very best players that are injured, but you do bring up Ryan McMahon, and Ryan McMahon this year is having the kind of, I wouldn't hesitate to say, breakout per se. I'm a little concerned about that, but he's been really good. Wins over replacements, sort of the catch-all metric for for baseball in general now. When you look at McMahon's year, he is at 1.7 wins above replacement, 13th best in the National League, regardless of position. If you go by position, Sandy, among third basemen, he's second to only Alec Boehm of the Phillies, and just there with Matt Chapman of the Giants.
Are 34 and 14.
Yeah, Max Muncy is a 1.4.
He's got a lot
for the
around
Dodgers.
him in the batting order.
Right, he's ahead of Austin Riley. He's ahead of a lot of talented guys. Nolan Arenado, by the way, not piling on at 0.4. McMahon having a much better year, hitting 306. 7 home runs, 25 RBI.
Perfectly respectable. And if you say we're a little bit past the quarter pole, and we are, I don't know that you can multiply all of that by 4. It's probably a little less than 4, but let's say we do. You're talking about 25 to 30 home runs
and 100 RBI,
and you're talking
300
about
batting
RBIs.
average. That's an all-star, and especially given that he plays good defense at third.
I will, and I share your reservations about the overused term breakout.
Right,
but I will say this: Ryan McMahon is having so far this year the start and the season I expected him to have in 2023.
On the defensive side of the ball, his fielding percentage is a .950, and that's maybe a little lower than you'd like due to the 7 errors. But the truth is, in defensive wins above replacement, he's .4, which is tied with Ezekiel Tovar for tops on the team. And we know that Tovar is a Gold Glove caliber defender. It's also worth noting in Tovar's case, Tovar, one of the major pieces of the puzzle for the Rockies, among shortstops in the National League. And we think about him as a glove guy, and we should. But his 19 RBI is 7th best among all of shortstops. And when you talk about guys that qualified shortstop now, like Mookie Betts, that's not really all that bad. You have Betts, you have Lindor, you have Ellie De La Cruz, the delightful to watch player from the Cincinnati Reds. And then you have Tovar and O'Neal Cruz of Pittsburgh, all stars in the making. Tovar's in there not only defensively, but offensively. The batting average is up to 276. The problem, and maybe the only fly in the ointment for Tovar, who's second on the team in wins of replacement at 1.1, is the strikeout to walk ratio. 58 strikeouts and 185 at bats. That, given today's Major League Baseball, is on the high side, but not that much. The problem is the 8 walks, the 8 to 58 ratio. He's got to start finding a way to get on base because he's got 4 steals. He can run a little bit. If he can find a way to get on base more often, get that on base percentage higher than the 311 that it is, Tovar then becomes a weapon for the Rockies in all facets of the game.
Even an on base percentage, there's been some growth from last year because he was below 300 last year. And you can't be hitting anywhere in the upper half of the lineup with that kind of on base percentage. Much less first or second. Those are on-base positions in the batting order, regardless of how you get there. And drawing 50 walks doesn't seem like too big an ask for Tovar.
Well, especially if you were to quadruple it again, even at this terrible pace, that's 32.
He's on pace for about half of the number of walks he should be getting. The strikeouts are what they are, and I don't mind if he strikes out 150 times.
He did last year,
200 times or more than 200 times, that becomes an issue too. You've got to put the ball in play. You can't simply rely on the big inning. At Coors Field, yes. On the road, no.
For Tovar last year in that rookie season, batting average 253, it's up to 276. On base percentage, as you mentioned, below 300, 287. Now it's 311. OPS, 695 last year, up to 749. And when
let's get him to an on base percentage of 335, 340.
And then
you can live with that.
Yeah, with that defense, you can absolutely live with that. So hopefully things get better for Tovar, who's a big part of the puzzle for the Rockies. But some of their young players, Brenton Doyle, the fade I expected has not occurred. Brendan Rodgers' batting average is creeping up.
You got 3/4 of an infield. I'll give you that much. I like their third baseman, short-term, long-term. I like their shortstop, short-term, long-term. I like their second baseman, now that he's healthy,
Yeah.
short-term, long-term. I don't like him as a cleanup hitter. That's where we started the season, but I like Brendan Rodgers short-term, long-term.
So there are some pieces of the puzzle going forward. If they can get Nolan Jones back, that will help. Jordan Beck in his debut now is played in 18 games, 226 batting average. He has no walks and 24 strikeouts in 62 at bats. We know the Rockies
He's not
rushed him.
really ready.
He isn't. But the Rockies did rush him with injuries to Jones and Bryant. They felt like they didn't have a choice. With a guy like Beck, do you just let him ride it out if you believe in him, or do you send him back for a little more seasoning when you get the chance?
I don't know exactly when you're getting Jones back. It's not. I don't think as pressing an issue for the Rockies because they're so far out of it. As long as he isn't being injured psychologically by this, yeah, I keep him in there. I work with him
because you have
try to get him
Jake
on base
Cave
a little more.
Bouchard. I'd rather play Beck.
I'd rather play him as long as he understands. Listen, we know you're being rushed. We don't expect you to hit 300. Right. We don't expect you even to hit 250. We expect you to play responsibly, maybe draw a few more walks, and any number would be better than zero. The strikeouts don't bother me very much. If he can give them even a little occasional power, that's fine. I think he's a good prospect. I guess what I'm trying to say is as long as you're not ruining him psychologically.
Yeah, if he seems like he's okay
his
with it,
progress, then I'm okay with him playing fairly regularly.
The Rockies tonight will get it going, a 3-game set in Oakland. Cal Quantrill takes the hill, one of the Rockies' better pitchers this season thus far. And it is possible that in this series, Nolan Jones may be able to make his return with a rehab assignment happening in Albuquerque. So we'll find out if they're able to do that soon enough. We'll turn our attention to the Denver Nuggets, and the idea of how much they can improve may be rather limited, not by their owners' money, we know that's there, but by the salary cap. But before that, Sandy, you have a message from our friends at I have one, I should say, from our friends at the Key Real Estate Group, and I do want to talk about that. You've heard me talk about them for months now, obviously, and Colorado home market's been crazy for a lot longer than that. So you need to find some people who can help you navigate it. And I do know the answer. It's Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. Whether it's condos to castles, when we say Colorado's luxury home team, you don't have to be in the market for a luxury home. You get the same high-end luxury service, whether you're buying or selling, no matter what it is you're looking for. And when you're looking to buy, you need experts that know Colorado's market and know how to ride all those highs and lows. The two things you want to go ahead and handle that is experience and stability. Well, that's where Key Real Estate Group shines. They're a privately held company with over 25 years in the exact same offices. That tells you they know real estate. That's as stable as it gets. The Fed is still expected to lower interest rates this year, so make sure to beat the competition and buy your new home before the spring and summer frenzy really returns to Denver. And even if you're thinking of a new build, which makes sense, home builders are offering great incentives right now, but you want to let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure you're getting everything you deserve. Here's how you find them. You call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group today at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them at keyrealestategroup.com.
Shawn and I have been around a while, as you may have detected in this business, and we know that currently podcasts are the in thing. And we know some of you are subscribed to the Sandy and Shawn podcast.
Might be listening right now. Yeah,
that's exactly right. You listen at your convenience. You listen to our show on demand whenever it fits your schedule. But we have a lot of other podcasts, and they are at least as valuable as ours. For the Nuggets, Ryan Blackburn keeps you up to date on what's happening with the 2023 NBA champions with the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. Arif Dean is always on the ice with the Avs, so check out his podcast, Hockey Mountain High. Good thing I'm not coming up with these titles for these shows. They're very creative. It is a good thing I'm not.
It would have been what, just Sandy's Hockey Podcast.
As we were talking baseball just a moment ago, fans know they can get the latest on the Rockies with Drew Kreisman and the 20th and Blake podcast. And the answer to the question as to whether Bo Nix will be the answer at quarterback for the Broncos, you can get the latest on that and a lot more. The latest injury that we'll be talking about shortly for the Broncos. Unfortunate as it comes during the early stages of the offseason, but you'll be up to date on all of that on our Broncos podcast with Troy Renk, as our friend from the Denver Post is featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. All that much more, just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, we take a look at the Denver Nuggets, and the idea of finding a way to improve is going to be a challenge. And it has to do with finances, not necessarily with talent. And maybe that led to a bit of a disconnect. So you talked about Ryan Blackburn and his terrific podcast, Pick X and Roll podcast, and the Alley-Oop podcast. You can find him on social at NBA Blackburn. So joining us now is Ryan Blackburn, the lead Nuggets writer for Mile High Sports and the host of those terrific podcasts. Ryan, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Guys, thank you for having me. Always appreciate it. It's always great to be here and hearing a little bit of a new medium, being able to talk Nuggets with you guys.
Yeah, a little bit. And it's for the Nuggets now. They are in a new place. They are out earlier than they expected, although for the last few years, the NBA champ goes out in this round, seemingly, as a little bit of parity hits the NBA for the Nuggets. I know fans look at it and think you need to bring in some other talent here and there, but the reality, and you did a really good job breaking it down over at Mile High Sports yesterday, is the Nuggets right now are over the $198.5 million, what they call termed the second apron for taxes. And that means it dramatically limits their options. It's not about cash, it's about cap space, right?
Yeah, not just even cap space. It's really about competitiveness. One of the things that the new CBA is doing this year is it's actually limiting the trade flexibility that you have. You cannot aggregate salaries together, so you can't trade like two smaller contracts for a bigger contract. You can't have you can't trade second or like first round picks out of 7 years. Like, so Denver's like, they have a 2031 first round pick that comes up next year. If they're over the second apron, they're not allowed to trade it. Like they can't. It is frozen by the NBA, which is a fascinating way to competitively balance things. But more than anything, like there are just so many different penalties. The luxury tax payments get even higher for being above the second apron. There's a lot of reasons why teams are afraid to go over that second apron. And it's not just because of the financial ramifications. It is because of the competitive constraints that it puts on so many of these teams.
Let's go down some of the free agents, starting with two, both of whom have player options for next season. We'll start with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. There are rumblings, perhaps you are sensitive to some of those rumblings, that he will decline that player option. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I'm hearing that he will decline that player option as well. It is the only logical thing for him to do at this stage of things. Like, he has a great opportunity capitalizing. He was nearly voted in as a second team all defense player this past year. And every team could use a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, somebody who bolsters their starting lineup, doesn't need the ball, can be effective without it, and connects the defense in a way that is super, super helpful for other star players on these opposing teams. He's been a two-time champion now, as the Nuggets like to note, and he is an extremely valuable piece. I think that the $15.4 million option that he has, it undersells what his value is and what his long-term value is. I think that more than likely he will be looking for 18 to 20 million per year on the open market, quite similar to what Bruce Brown got. Now, Brown had a team option on the end of his deal, so it was kind of a fake $20 million per year. It was $20 million this year. But I think that KCP can lock in a long-term contract with the team. Whether it's the Nuggets or not remains to be seen.
The problem, of course, I think when fans are thinking, okay, well, he leaves, it frees up $15 million on the salary cap. The problem is it doesn't. And
That's
if he chooses to
CBA
leave,
works.
It's difficult for the Nuggets to replace him.
Undoubtedly. Like there isn't an easy way for the Nuggets to actually use that 20 million. Like, so 15 million doesn't transfer over. It's not like because Denver's over the salary cap, not even the luxury tax, because they're over the salary cap, they cannot just use that extra 15 million that KCP is not being paid. So the most likely thing is that Denver's going to try to retain him. They can pay him as much money as they want to, but as we talked about, because they have his full bird rights, so that means that they can go. It's something that they didn't have with Bruce Brown.
Did not have that with Bruce Brown.
Exactly, and that's the most important thing with this situation. They have the capability to retain him to pay as much money as they want to, but the competitive balances of this new CBA and the second tax apron, there are lots of things that the Nuggets are going to have to think about. It's one of the reasons why when Denver has paid their starting lineup as much as they have, including Nikola Jokic, supermax contract, Jamal Murray, a rookie max, Michael Porter, a rookie max, and Aaron Gordon, a veteran extension, they have paid a bunch of money to keep this group together. And this is, I think, the first real time where you could expect that group, like they might not be back next year.
The Nuggets starting five for 2 years running was the best in the league by the metrics to which you and Shawn have been referring in the last few minutes. This year in the playoffs, the starting five was at minus 6.9 points per 100 possessions. That's in the playoffs this year after, for the second straight year, leading among starting fives in the regular season, according to points per 100 possessions. Have the days of the Nuggets been able to convincingly boast of having the best starting five in the NBA days gone by now?
I don't think so. I think if Denver retained all five guys, then they would have a similar amount of regular season success. Think about it. They won 57 games this year. Mm-hmm. There were even times where they could have been better than where they were. There were times where they were definitely struggling to stay focused, stay attached. But the one thing that I think people have to remember for this particular group is that it hasn't just been a couple years, because Michael Porter was injured the previous year. Mm-hmm. Jamal Murray injured the previous two for 2021 and 2022. They did have Aaron Gordon during that entire time. KCP was a guy that they've long wanted. They knew exactly how he would fit into this, and it fit like a glove, like no questions asked. I think that the league is catching up a little bit in terms of how to guard Denver, but I also don't want to overreact to the best possible team to guard Denver. Unsurprisingly, guarding Denver pretty well. I think that Minnesota was
very well, particularly in this series. I was talking about numbers that applied to the playoffs, in other words, the Lakers series too, but those numbers are even worse.
Oh yeah.
Starting five versus Minnesota starting five in this series just concluded.
And I think part of that has to do with Jamal Murray struggling with injuries, but also just underwhelming. I don't know how much of that is to do with like the league kind of figuring out how to guard him versus him not rising to the occasion. I think it's a combination of a lot of factors. I think that Denver could use a secondary ball handler at times where you free up Jamal a little bit. And that ball handler cannot really come from this starting group because KCP is a traditional 3-and-D wing. Michael Porter, anytime he dribbles the ball and is asked to be a playmaker, he has really struggled with that as well. Denver's a limited starting group if you can crack Jamal Murray and if you can crack Joker in the pick and roll. And the T-Wolves, and to a lesser extent the Lakers, figured out how to do that. I wonder if other teams can catch on to that as well.
Well, Ryan, hypothetically then, let's say that KCP declines his option, becomes a free agent, goes somewhere else, then maybe the fix for that is to find a more offensively minded player to take that role. The problem is, given the options that they have available, how could they do that? Is there any way they can land a player of significance who you believe could plug into the starting five that's not on this roster already?
Yeah, good luck. That's the thing to remember with this, is that you can't just exchange any other player that fits reasonably well. Right,
because they're KCP. Over, even though KCP leaves, you can't replace his $15 million. You only have, if I'm not mistaken, about $5.1 million to replace him, right?
Yeah, there's some flexibility that they could do if they also let go of Reggie, if they also trade away Zeke Naji for a minimum contract. Like they could find a way to open up a little bit more money, but not that much. I think what you might see if KCP leaves is Denver might try to orchestrate a sign and trade with another team that tries to pick him up. It might open up the door for other teams that don't have as much cap space to try to seek him out. Now, teams are not going to want to trade anything back to Denver if they can help it. So that may not be a great avenue. And if Denver can't get anything back in a sign and trade, then I would look at the ring chasers. I would look at the players that are the veteran free agents, the guys that are looking around. They've earned the money in their careers. It's more about winning a championship. I would look at some of those guys, maybe the equivalent of an Eric Gordon or somebody of that nature that was last year, that was a big bell of the ball for the Suns. I would look at the equivalent of somebody like that as a stopgap option for Denver. And, or maybe they try to fill it in internally and they say, Christian Brown, Julian Strother, Peyton Watson, one of you is going to start at shooting guard. The question is who, and the question is who fits best. I'm not sure I think any of those options are perfect.
We used to call it the $1 million question. I guess in this day and age, we call it maybe the $100 million question to me for this offseason. And I'll ask you straight out, since you have commented on this subject before. Are Calvin Booth and Michael Malone, in your opinion, on the same page?
I think it's a battle. It's a constant battle between what the financial and competitive limitations there are on a team like the Nuggets that already had the salary that they did. I think there's a battle between that, what Calvin Booth decided to do this past offseason, and what Michael Malone, who wants to win now for obvious reasons and take advantage of this moment.
And in fairness to Malone, coaches usually do.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
the executive's job to plan long term. The coach always is thinking about the short term, given the relative length of a coach's stay in any one place vis-a-vis a GM stay in any one particular place.
And not to mention, how long do you have to really capitalize on having the best player in the world? Think
How
about
many years
all of
left on Joker's contract? 4?
Yeah, and
That's your window.
Yep.
But who knows if Joker's still the best player in the world by the end of that window?
Right.
True. He's been the best player in the world to me for at least 5 years.
But we just watched Anthony Edwards up close and personal, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. There are options. There are guys coming.
Luka
Doncic is still in. I mean, yeah, it's who knows in 4 years.
And you've got Victor Wembanyama waiting in the wings. He's
whose team, by the way, dealt Denver its biggest loss of the season, apart from the Game 7 loss the other night.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
And it was on his shoulders.
No doubt about it.
Down 23, Wembanyama led them back, and that cost Denver the #1 seed and forced Denver to play hard on Sunday for just the #2 seed.
It's a tough way to go. And I think at this point that I don't agree that Michael Malone and Calvin Booth are not on the same page. I think they both have their own individual goals, but they both want the Nuggets to win a championship. To Calvin Booth's credit, he added several young players that he hopes that the Nuggets can continue to develop and continue to get better over the course of these next few years. And maybe it does help maximize that 4-year window that you're talking about, Sandy, that Nikola Jokic has his best opportunity to win another championship. Maybe not this year, but in the years going forward. I'm not sure if I fully subscribe to that theory, because I think that Malone has a really big point here that Denver had a great opportunity. But as we've seen, sometimes things don't line up for you really well. And a guy like Jamal Murray gets hurt. A guy like Michael Porter really struggles. And the Nuggets are learning a lot about themselves over the course of these last 2 years, that sometimes it's better to be the hunter than the hunted.
But Calvin Booth can't possibly agree with Michael Malone's considered decision to effectively take Peyton Watson out of this series, certainly by the latter half and the game the other day, during which he did not play at all. It's hard for me to imagine that Calvin Booth was good with that.
He might not have been. What I will counter with is saying that the 3 guys that Denver did play off the bench, Christian Brown, Reggie Jackson, Justin Holiday, They all made their contributions throughout the series. The Nuggets, in large part, due to the bench.
Even Holiday and Jackson hardly played on Sunday. The only bench player he seemed to trust by the end of the series was Brown.
And that's how the series works. That's honestly just how the playoffs works. Like, you're never going to keep a large rotation like deep into the playoffs. I'll remind you that Jeff Green in Game 5 of the NBA Finals played 4 minutes. Like, he played the same kind of.
I understand that. I understand that. That was a sure sign that Jeff Green wasn't coming back.
Well, let me hop in and ask both of you guys this, because I think that this is maybe the cogent argument to make about the upcoming season, right? Because you can talk about whether the GM did it right or the coach did it right, but here's the deal. We've gone over all the numbers. There is no way to replace a KCP with anybody probably likely as good as KCP. Whether you like the draft picks or not, whether Michael Malone liked the draft picks or not, Calvin Booth went and got 3 guys with extensive college experience from significant programs with the clear intent of assuming that they would make the jump to the NBA, that transition easier, even if their ceiling was lower. And then it's incumbent upon the coach to try to coach them up. To me, it's not even about this series or either the playoff series. It's about the investment in time on the court that Julian Strawther or Hunter Tyson or Jalen Pickett or Peyton Watson needed to make in the regular season. They needed regular season times because they needed to be coached up. They needed to find enough of an ability here to be able to contribute at these moments. And then it's not only just about how much they can play in this series, but it's about the fatigue that added up among the starting 5 that was evident in Game 7, when by the time they got to halftime, they were out of gas and they were going to get beat by the Timberwolves or just about anybody. But it's not about this series. It was about Michael Malone needing to, because look, the reinforcements aren't coming, guys. They're not coming. It's not going to happen. The cap doesn't allow it. The Nuggets are going to have to go with young players, and Michael Malone is going to have to coach them up and going to have to play them during the regular season, or this is what the Nuggets will be doomed to again next year.
There's no doubt. Like, this is the process. This is the part of the problem that the Nuggets are facing. I do think it's also part of the, like, it's the bed that the Nuggets made for themselves. And not all of this is on Calvin Booth. Some of this is on Tim Connolly.
Of course.
The max extension that Michael Porter. Yeah, that Michael Porter was.
You can win with 3 max players, but you had better win with 3 max players. And to win, they have to play like 3 max players. The Nuggets didn't have 3 max players this year playing like max players.
Not against Minnesota.
Not against Minnesota, certainly.
Did not play like a max player against Minnesota. Maybe against the Lakers. Yes. Definitely not against Minnesota.
Yeah. 5 games of single digits is not going to cut it. And that's just the unfortunate thing. Michael Malone was talking about it, how much pressure there was on Jokic and Murray to handle the scoring burden in that Game 7. And said we needed another guy. And I think that was directed towards Michael Porter in a lot of ways. But you could also say that the other 2 guys, Aaron Gordon, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, they did not score enough. They did not shoot enough in order to really bolster what was going on. So if there is an argument for Denver getting some help, for changing things up, that is probably the one. Because if Michael Porter is unable to handle that additional offensive responsibility when the time comes, then I don't know how that changes going forward.
Well, more on that in a minute, but we want to thank Brian Blackburn for joining us. NBA Blackburn is the handle on social, the host of the Pickaxe and Roll podcast and the Alley Oop podcast. If you want to understand what's going on in the offseason with the Nuggets, not only on the court, but off it, and the business behind it that ends up driving all of it, there is no better follow in town. Give Ryan a follow and make sure you check out all his work all offseason on milehighsports.com. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, guys. Always appreciate it.
Well, we talk about Michael Porter Jr. Of course, there are some thought process about freeing up a certain amount of money. How can they do that? Well, we'll talk about it in a moment, but, I'm getting hungry.
Well, I am too. And you've heard their signature ads around here for many, many years. And by now you probably know that locally owned and operated GB Fish and Chips has the best drinks, meat pies, and fish and chips this side of the pond. I love that phrase. But did you know GB Fish and Chips caters? With graduation, summer block party season around the corner, give your friends and family a unique fry-on-site experience. And the best part of catering is you don't have to do any work. You enjoy your own party. GB Fish and Chips does all the work. Stop by any of their 4 metro locations or visit gbfishandchips.com and bring authentic fish and chips to your next gathering. That's gbfishandchips.com.
Well, we talk about Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter Jr. in the series against Minnesota. There is no way to disguise it. He was not good. And it was obviously an issue because the shot wasn't falling. And when the shot doesn't fall for Michael Porter Jr., it seems like the rest of his game suffers. Against Minnesota, 10.7 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per game, and a shooting of an abysmal 37.1%, just slightly worse than that, 32.5% on 3. That in itself wasn't disastrous, but on the whole, it really was. So the idea with Porter Jr., who is signed through the 2026-2027 season, and makes at this point $35+ million a year. The idea of maybe trading him is the case. I will give this to fans first to understand, though. In the regular season, here's were his numbers: 16.7 points per game, 7.0 rebounds per game, 48.4% shooting. In the playoffs as a whole, because as subpar as he was against the Timberwolves, he was really good against the Lakers.
And maybe even save them from having to play a 6th or 7th game against the Lakers because they were behind for 70% of that series. He bailed them out.
So in the playoffs, 15.8 points, 6.8 rebounds. So he went down 0.9 points and 0.2 rebounds. His shooting went from 48.4 to 46.6. Not huge. The overall playoff performance in line with his regular season numbers, but the way that it changed from series to series, you can't ignore that.
You can't ignore it. And my reaction to Porter throughout this season, and particularly during the course of the playoffs, is a layered reaction. There wasn't a single nugget, and there could have been several, who stood up as Porter did and said, I lost this series for us. Because in 5 of the 7 games, including each of the last 4 of this series, 2 of which were won by the Nuggets, 2 of which were won by the Timberwolves, he scored in single digits. Good for him to step up. And that earned him additional respect in the locker room, I'm sure. But when you're playing on a max deal, you've got to play like a max player. And neither during the regular season or overall during the playoffs did he play entirely like a max player. And the standards are very high. Maybe he can meet those standards. We were commenting up until a few months ago about how the Nuggets at some point would have to make a choice as to which of 2 players to keep, Michael Porter Jr. or Aaron Gordon. I would expand that circle a bit now to include Jamal Murray. I don't believe in the long term the Nuggets can keep all 3.
Porter Jr. after the series said, quote, "This was a terrible series. I felt like I might have had 1 or 2 good games out of the 7 we played. Part of it was the way they were guarding. Part of it was that my shot wasn't falling. It's tough because I know that if I played up to par with how I normally play, we would have won this series. And there's a lot of things that could have been different as a team, but I know if I played my part, we would have won the series, and I've got to live with that." Well, it's worth noting Porter also played in 81 games this year. He broke the franchise record for 3-pointers made in a single season. The second half of the season, his shooting splits were 50, 40, 90. So better than 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90%
and that
from
is
the free
max
throw line.
Player stuff.
That is, and only when you talk about that shooting percentage, only 4 players in the NBA even tried more 3-pointers than Porter and hit them at a higher percentage. And you probably know them: Steph Curry, Paul George, CJ McCollum, and then Dante DiVincenzo. But Porter Jr. is way taller than all of them. And prior to Game 7, Timberwolves coach Chris Finch talked a little bit about the difficulty of that matchup. He said he's so dangerous with the size. You have to be mindful of how far you are off on him at any time. He's got great size and shoots the ball high, a quick release, and a sidestep dribble. Fortunately, we're able to put some size on him too, which could help bother him. And that was it. And I think when you do look at this a little bit, when we look at the Avalanches getting beat by the Stars, and we look at the top line not connecting. At a certain point, I think you don't give the stars their respect and realize this is a very disciplined, smart defensive team. They made life difficult. Jaden McDaniels is an outstanding one-on-one defender with length. And some of this may be that Porter Jr. also had a really tough matchup against a guy who can defend him well.
I don't disagree with any of that. But the fact of the matter is Jaden McDaniels is not a max player, and Michael Porter Jr. is. And that was the one matchup that actually intrigued me most of all going into this series, among many that intrigued me. That was at the top of the list because I wasn't sure how it would turn out based on the fact that McDaniels didn't play in the series last year between the Timberwolves and the Nuggets.
Right.
And Porter did fairly well against the people who were trying to defend him. This year, McDaniels was healthy, played big minutes, played in every game. Early in the series, I thought, interestingly enough, while Denver was losing, Michael Porter was doing better individually. As Denver got better in the series, apart from the 7th game, and obviously the 6th game was a disaster on all fronts. That wasn't just Michael Porter. It seemed like McDaniels was slowly but surely gaining the edge in that matchup. And that allowed Minnesota to do what no team has ever done before: win the first 2 games of a best-of-7 series on the road, lose the next 3, and come back and win the last 2, including a 3rd road win in Game 7.
The challenge with trading someone like Michael Porter Jr., who at $35.8 million, $35.9 million rounding up, he will have the 35th highest salary in the entire NBA coming into next year. 35th. He has the exact same contract, literally exact, because got the rookie max, as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It is exactly the same. It ends at exactly the same time. They make exactly the same money. That's 35th highest in the league. So the question is, who wants to take that on if they believe that Porter Jr. is maybe past the back problems, and maybe that playing 81 games indicates that he is, but then who wants to trade you a $30 million guy that is somehow going to be an upgrade from Porter Jr.? Could you go get, maybe if you wanted to go older, maybe, I don't know. I'm just throwing a name out hypothetically. I don't see why they'd want to, but okay. The salaries would match. A Chris Middleton, same position from the Bucks. Okay, would that be an upgrade for the Nuggets? Possibly, but why would the Bucks do it? What are you at a point where you can go get guys that play those same positions? Do you want to try to go see if you can pry Porzingis from the Celtics? Well, they're still playing. Why would you want that?
There's
Andrew
no way.
Wiggins from the Warriors. They're not going to make those trades.
The Wiggins thing is kind of interesting to me.
Wiggins
peaked.
He makes
in
$27 million.
I know it works with the money. I think it might work. That's the one name that might work in more than just financial ways where there's a match, because I sense a little bit of disappointment in San Francisco with Wiggins, and maybe a little bit here with Porter. And I say a little bit because to blame him solely for the loss against Minnesota, as he blamed himself, is unfair. No. And good for him to step forward and take on that responsibility for losing the series. But the fact of the matter is he didn't. And for those who were inclined to react strongly to my commentary about Michael Malone yesterday, I just want to clarify a couple of things. And I'm not taking back a single word of what I said.
If you missed it, go to milesports.com or the app and go get it. It was.
I did not at any point yesterday advocate for the firing of Michael Malone, nor did I at any point yesterday place sole blame for losing the series on Michael Malone. I merely faulted him for his Game 7 mismanagement that, in my humble opinion, was a major reason as to why the Nuggets lost Game 7, as distinguished from the series. And I also didn't particularly take to his post-game reaction, which, by the way, was challenged. Just the commentary, forget about the behavior. Even his commentary was challenged by Jamal Murray, who, upon being informed of Micah Malone's comments that the Nuggets were just tuckered out after a long championship season and a short offseason, said, quote unquote, "That makes no sense to me." So I'm not the only one who's in disagreement or disappointed in the way Michael Malone handled himself on Sunday.
I think that training Michael Porter Jr. is going to be tough. It's obviously the money is going to be difficult, and you're going to have to be in a partnership with somebody who doesn't like some of the things from their own player. You want me to throw a dart out there? If you really want to swing big, Nuggets fans, you could throw in a Zeke Naji or someone who makes just a little bit of money. You could take a swing at John Morant if you want a guy that can handle the ball and a guy that can score. The salaries very closely match up. Memphis is certainly done with that deal. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess if you're the Nuggets, you could ask. Of course, if that was the case, we would probably also want to make sure that we brought a little bit of attention to, well, the folks that you have a message from, our friends at Zaner Harden Law.
Well, yes.
Fortunately, they work in a totally different world.
They
fortunately
don't call
for them.
you the Sultan of the Segway for nothing. We will talk about our friends from Zaner Harden Law. No one ever plans to be, for example, in a car accident. You plan for a lot of things. That ain't one of them. But if you do get involved in a car accident or sustain a major injury, you need an attorney, and you need the very best. You need to call Zaner Harden Law. Kurt Zaner and Mark Harden are the kinds of lawyers you want handling your case. They're two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado and in the country. They've won nearly every award imaginable. They've appeared in the Denver Post, local news channels. They've appeared on Good Morning America as well. These guys handle the most important cases. They work tirelessly to make sure our community is a safe place to live. With multi-million-dollar verdicts and the respect of every insurance company, you're lucky to have these guys right here in our own backyard. So if you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zaner Harden Law today at yourstorywillbetold.com. That's yourstorywillbetold.com.
Look, obviously, if you're listening to us, if you're watching us, however you're getting this program right now, you love sports and you've watched sports and you're listening to sports. Well, you've probably heard all of the ads for online sports betting. Obviously, there's a lot of them out there. It's so many that it can be overwhelming. You heard them, you've seen them. Some of them you've probably already memorized, but there are ways to go through it that are to your advantage. So we're going to add maybe one more to the pile, but I think we'll make it easy. This is going to be worth it. Over at Mile High Sports, we've gathered all the best sign-up bonuses and offers and put them on one page on our website. Maybe you're thinking of getting into one of the sports books and you don't know which one's going to give you the best deal, and you should be hunting for the deals. Absolutely be hunting for the deals. So we wanted to make it easy. We brought them all together on one page. Makes it simple to know what the best available options are for you, whether that's bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of those things, everything all in one place. So simplify it for yourself. If you want to get into that, visit milehighsports.com today or download our mobile app. And when you get there, you click on Colorado Sports Betting, and all of the best opportunities for you from all of the sports book that you can access here in Colorado are available to you, and you can just pick and choose from there. Instead of searching all over the place, we put it in one spot, milehighsports.com, then Colorado Sports Betting. It's that simple. Think of that as our little bonus to you from your friends at Mile High Sports. Sandy, the Denver Broncos have OTAs going, and they have already lost one of their linebackers. Second-year linebacker Drew Sanders tore his Achilles tendon, but it's worth noting in this story, interestingly enough, that it didn't happen in the OTAs that are happening this week. It happened about a month ago in the early parts of the workout program where you're not even really doing anything football related. So the Achilles is torn. The likelihood of missing the entire season is there. He may not miss all of it, but at very least, he's going to miss the vast majority of it. And that's going to set him back. The third-round pick in 2023, first played inside linebacker. The Broncos wanted to move him to the outside. He did play in all 17 games of the rookie as a rookie, started 4 of them, had 24 total tackles. and seemed to be ready to play a larger part this year. Although by moving him to the outside, which the Broncos seem to want to do, I don't know if they actually just dislike inside linebackers or what, as they wanted to move Sanders like they moved Baron Browning.
I
like
think they feel they're inside linebackers from years past. Those who've actually played on the inside are eminently replaceable. Josie Jewell left in free agency. The Broncos had no interest in bringing back Josie Jewell. Has been a starter for several years.
Mm-hmm. So
Alex Singleton is still there, but I think does this not explain the drafting of Ellis?
It entirely explains it. 100%.
Even though the Broncos at the time of the draft said nothing about an injury that they had to have known about by then because it happened weeks earlier. That was the injury to Drew Sanders.
Though, I like that. I mean, if you're going to play a little bit of poker in the draft, which you do, and you try to have a poker face, and the Broncos kind of couldn't because they didn't have many picks and everyone knew they needed a quarterback, this was a good move. So in the 2023 draft, they picked Sanders in the 3rd round, 67th overall. They went to Jonah Ellis, the linebacker from Utah, 76th overall. So pretty close to the same spot in the 3rd round, knowing about this injury to Sanders. So I will give them credit because a lot of the time you think about, oh, this injury happened in OTAs. How are you going to replace this guy? Well, the Broncos already replaced him, to their credit. I mean, that they got on it. They got a guy that who actually, and the funny thing is Ellis, unlike Sanders, is actually considered more of a pass rusher, whereas the Broncos were trying to take Sanders.
His strength. That's his game.
Sanders was his strength is a rangy,
hybrid,
a speed guy who could go sideline to sideline, who in theory you think you'd like covering tight ends. That's not the way the Broncos, I guess, apparently intended to use him this year. But if they were going to use him as an outside linebacker and rush the quarterback, they may have even upgraded in Ellis immediately, but you do wonder what that means for Sanders if when he comes back. You have Nick Bonito there. You have Jonathan Cooper there. You have Ellis there. There's a lot of guys stacked up at that outside linebacker.
Don't you have Baron Browning there?
And Baron Browning as well. That's 4 deep.
He might be the best of the bunch.
Yeah.
If he can stay healthy.
And the idea for the Broncos seems to be continue to maybe do what you used to see from Seattle all the time and just keep rolling guys in and out, line changes, I guess, an edge rusher.
Right. Changing on the fly.
And maybe that's not a bad approach, given the fact the idea is you want to get these guys as fresh as possible. And if there's not much difference between your quote-unquote first string and second string, maybe that's an effective way to go.
Oh, I think it's the new way to go. I think throughout the league, that's what you're looking to do. And you have all these linebackers. Micah Parsons is the best example, who can literally play every position save possibly for nose tackle on defense. Honestly,
possibly.
I mean, I suppose you don't want him at corner.
Probably not corner.
But 8 out of the 11 positions on defense, Micah Parsons can play with equal skill.
Yeah.
That's the kind of linebacker you want. You want hybrids. The Jewels, and with all due respect, the Singletons, they're off-ball linebackers from days gone by. They can't rush the passer. They don't cover particularly well. They're known as run stuffers, but the Broncos' defense against the run, especially on the inside and on the goal line this year, was not that special. And so I think as linebacking core go throughout the NFL, you're looking for versatility. You're looking for speed, maybe even more than you're looking for size. Ideally, and Parsons is this ideal, you get both size and speed and versatility.
Well, they don't have a Micah Parsons, but they are trying to cobble together enough of a pass rush when you're talking about all those multiple players. And maybe that will work because we know what they're facing in the AFC West, minus the Raiders.
Have to have a pass rush.
But you've got to have a pass rush, and they probably have to remain fresh. And I guess if the idea is your off-ball linebacker, your inside linebacker, your Mike, or whatever you want to call it, in Singleton's case, is there to hoover up a bunch of tackles, scoop up the running game and just kind of clean up the messes.
Just prefer he make the tackles a little bit closer, like
to the line
about
of
5
scrimmage.
years closer to the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, and that's a challenge when you talk about what you have to do with tight ends. And so that's where I do question it a little bit. But you're right. The Broncos are going with the trend of just bringing guys heat after the quarterback from every angle all the time. We'll find out if that works. But losing Drew Sanders, it's not a make or break thing, not by any stretch. But you have a guy that played in all 17 games as a rookie, was coming on more and more, certainly had the ability to go sideline to sideline. The idea was kind of poor man's Micah Parsons, essentially in Sanders' case, and he had reasonably good hands and was able to make the interception. So the Travis Kelce's of the world, you were sort of hoping he could hang with those guys, but even the Broncos seem to have given up on that.
Tell me if you
I don't know how
agree
much a loss it is immediately, although I certainly hope the best for Sanders in his recovery.
I do think he was a guy, though, who played less than a quarter of the snaps last year on the defensive side of the ball. And I think there was a good chance this year that might be closer to 1 out of every 3 snaps, maybe a little bit more than 1 out of every 3 snaps to keep those people fresh. And I thought he had a pretty decent rookie year, 24 tackles, 1 tackle for a loss, a fumble recovery, played 23% of the snaps, 253 in all to be exact. The only good news is that a 6 to 9 month injury that was announced today becomes a 5 to 8 month injury from today on forward.
Right. And the new surgeries for this certainly make it better. Remember last year when Tim Patrick tore his Achilles on August 1st, that's quite a bit later than now. And he was actually may have been able to even play at the end of the regular season, but the Broncos had put him on injured reserve and had basically ruled him out for the year at that point. So maybe in this case, Sanders will
Wasn't Aaron Rodgers making noise in December?
Right.
If the Jets got into contention.
But you'll notice that he didn't actually play. But at the same time, talked a lot.
He's a little more valuable than Drew Sanders.
But in Sanders' case, maybe he's able to come back by the end of the season. I do believe there's some value for the future for him, especially if he can come back from this injury. But the Broncos, to their credit, they knew about it. They addressed it immediately during the draft, and they addressed it with a guy that, quite frankly, at least seems like a better fit on the outside than Sanders. So it's too bad for Sanders, but it's a terrific opportunity for rookie Jonah Ellis.
I agree. And Jonah Ellis is ready to play. You come from the Utah football program.
He's a good player.
And you're coached the way they're coached at Utah. You are ready to play. He jumped
off the screen for me
from day one
multiple times at Utah, and he looked like he was ready to go. A little surprising he was available in the third. So hopefully for the Broncos, they'll be able to get that going quickly, because things for this team look like the odds are very, very long, and that's just kind of the way it shakes out. But we'll talk a little bit more about OTAs, but I want to tell you again, if you haven't had a chance to hear it, that this Colorado home market's been crazy for years. It's not getting less crazy, and if you're selling your home, you need to talk to my friends Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. When we talk about Colorado's luxury home team, doesn't mean you have to have luxury home. It just means luxury and home, luxury service for your home, whether you're buying or selling it. So you get that high-end luxury service from Dave and Mark because they're experts in Colorado's market. They know about the highs and the lows because they've done it. 25 years in the same offices. They're privately owned. You can't get better than that. You deal with them, and you know that they're experienced. Inventory around Denver, surprise, surprise, is still low. So homes that are priced right move very, very quickly. Let Dave and Mark give you a free valuation. And spring is here. Summer's coming. You know folks are starting to look for their homes. So there's no reason for you to wait getting yours on the market. Let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure you're getting everything that you deserve. Call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group today at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com, because people want to buy homes in Colorado. You may have noticed. Get with the best. The Denver Broncos, Sandy, have their OTAs going this week. It is one of the series of OTAs. In this case, you can get on the football field. It's non-contact. You're not running anything really similar to practice, but position groups get to get on the field and do the basics. Obviously, a lot of eyeballs end up on Bo Nix. And the notion that the Broncos are going to keep trying to tamp down that, he'll compete for the starting job with Zach Wilson and with and finding themselves with Zach Wilson and Jared Stidham. But all this stuff is mindset. And the way that the Broncos are trying to install that right now is mindset. And it reminds me a little bit about our friend, Dr. Rick Perea.
Yes. And I will talk about Rick Perea as a premier performance psychologist in just a second here. But he may also be a premier prognosticator. Who was it, if not Dr. Rick Perea, who told us last year when Colorado was 3-0 that they would be doing very well to win one of their remaining 9 games? How did Colorado finish? Exactly as he said they would, 1-8. When the playoffs started, and most all of us were bullish on the Nuggets' chances to perhaps repeat as NBA champions in 2024, Rick Perea said they will have trouble with the Lakers, and they did, and they will lose to the Timberwolves, and they did. So maybe we have to expand the portfolio just a little bit. But for our purposes, our checkup from the neck up takes place every Wednesday at 5:30 on Mile High Sports Radio. Rick's podcast appears as well on Mile High Sports, one of many podcasts. He's the former chief psychologist for the 2015 world champion Denver Broncos, the Colorado Rockies in their 2-year lead up to playoff runs in 2017 and 2018. And of course, the former world champion Denver Nuggets. Rick Perea has worked with them and offered valuable insight about the Nuggets to all of us. He speaks in front of corporate audiences on a regular basis, but to me, his main value comes in the work he does with adolescents, middle, high school performers, allowing them to reach peak levels of performance, whether it's at work, at play, or at school. Call Dr. P today at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933. Or look him up at Dr. P at think1number4u.org. That's think1for-you.org.
As the Broncos OTAs get underway, non-contact workouts today through the 23rd, and then soon enough, the next series of OTAs will be May 28th through the 30th, and then another June 3rd through 6th. Those are the OTAs. The one to pay attention to, I think, is the mandatory minicamp that starts on June 11th.
Of course.
And the question will be whether Cortland Sutton attends. In the meantime, there is no expectation for Sutton, who the Broncos have said, quote, is in a good place. Despite the fact that he clearly wants a new contract and is not participating in the voluntary portions of the offseason.
One of those places, whether it be a good place or not, doesn't happen to be Dove Valley.
Right. Exactly.
At this particular time.
Not at this point. So looking for a new deal, 2 years left on his contract, only $2 million guaranteed of the $27.6 million remaining on that 4-year extension he signed in the fall of 2021. So even though they are maybe starting some of the basic drills with Bo Nix, he won't have Cortland Sutton, the most experienced receiver and the most accomplished receiver on the team, available. That opens up some opportunities, though. Troy Franklin, drafted in the 4th round, Nix's top receiver at Oregon, continues to open eyes, and the idea behind getting him, obviously, I think the Broncos liked his ability overall, but you've moved on from Jerry Jeudy. Tim Patrick's return, who knows how that will look after missing multiple years in a row of injuries, and he had an injury history before that. Franklin has an opportunity to carve out a massive role behind, let's presume, that Sutton is there when the season starts, even though that's still in question. And new addition, Josh Reynolds. Franklin has the inside track to clearly be wide receiver 3. And even though he's not really a slot guy, that you can kind of mix and match.
Well, given the rapport that already exists between Nix and Franklin, I think you certainly can mix and match. The rapport is much more important than the positional designation. And they know each other inside and out. They've worked together. The best parts of their respective careers have come in conjunction with each other. And they come from, and I'm oversimplifying here, the type of offense at Oregon that is similar to what the demands on both of them happen to be in the offing
Yeah,
here.
I mean, quick
seem
releases,
to be
use the middle of the
very
field.
easy transition for both.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. It will be so interesting to see how this comes together because look, we're not gonna give into the very silly narrative that you'll get around town for a while because between now and training camp, you'll have to hear as people kind of try to look for content. Oh, well, will Bo Nix win QB1? How will Bo Nix compare against Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham? Well, we'll just tell you right now. He's QB1. He'll start on week 1. That's not in question, no matter what anybody at Dove Valley tells you and no matter what anyone else tells you. You pick the guy 12 overall. He's your handpicked guy. That's the starter. And that's okay because nobody has started more college games in their career than Bo Nix. No quarterback has ever come to the NFL with more starting experience than Bo Nix. And he gets his top receiver. His top receiver, by the way, in Franklin's case, 13 games last year, 8 of them went over 100 yards. This is expected to be plug and play. The question isn't whether Nix can play in a Sean Payton system. He most certainly can. That's why he's here. The question is, the idea that a lot of other evaluators looked at it and said that he's a second rounder or maybe even a third rounder. What's the ceiling and how much does that actually impact the Broncos? I don't think that happens this year. But if Nix quickly takes control of this offense and quickly locks up that QB1 role that even the Broncos admit that it's his, maybe there is hope to at least stay in the mix for the wild card this year and get over that 5.5 over under that Vegas has for the Broncos wins this year.
I know we've said a lot of things about a lot of quarterbacks who have come here and started games since Peyton Manning retired. There have been a dozen of them who are real quarterbacks.
Literally a dozen. Literally a dozen.
We've said a lot of things about these quarterbacks. We haven't talked much about floor and ceiling because there's only been, for most all of them, a very low floor and an exceedingly low ceiling. That's a bad combination. I think what you look for in Bo Nix in 2024, and frankly from the passing game generally in 2024, is a high floor.
Mm-hmm.
We'll worry about the ceiling later. Let's get back from a Bronco point of view to a high floor, to
and what does that look like?
Basic fundamental execution and offensive play that's good enough at least to stay in most every game, whether you're playing a bad team you should beat or a good team that you might hope to beat at home, maybe not so much on the road. Simple competence.
Russell Wilson
and competence means a high floor. Simple competence would be nice.
3,070 yards, 26 touchdowns, 19 quarterbacks had more than 3,000 yards. Wilson had the lowest at 3,070. The 26 touchdowns, obviously, while a number that I guess Broncos fans aren't overwhelmed with, but it was 9th in the NFL and only one behind Patrick Mahomes, who had 27, and Mahomes had 14 picks to Wilson's 8. But the idea of Wilson coming back was so the disastrous a notion to Peyton that he went and took the biggest salary cap dead money ever.
There was never a notion of bringing Russell Wilson back as far as Sean Payton was concerned. Sean Payton considered Russell Wilson to be incompetent.
I get that. So that means that what Russell Wilson put up has to be definitely exceeded by Bo Nix, right? I mean, if Bo Nix is competent, he'll exceed that. That means Bo Nix has to get to probably the same numbers, 3,000 yards. I think that's doable because now that's only 205 yards
if he's
a game.
Healthy.
It's 200 passing yards a game. But 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, that's top 10 in the league in touchdown passes and only one behind the best player on the planet. And the interceptions were low. The expectations for Nix, I think you're right when you talk about the high floor, but the high floor is probably 3,300 yards and 30 touchdowns?
Well, in Peyton's mind, this is my
only 4
guess.
Quarterbacks threw for 30 touchdowns last year.
Yes. Peyton's view of Wilson's statistics last year was that they were
a mirage. Mm-hmm.
Not even a mirage. Not even a mirage. Irrelevant. He didn't run Peyton's offense. He didn't paint by the numbers in the way Peyton wants his quarterbacks to Pay by the numbers and give him a little bit more than just painting by the numbers in the way that Drew Brees did. And we know Russell Wilson never reminded in any way, shape, or form Sean Payton of Drew Brees.
At any point in his career.
We know that in most every respect, Bo Nix reminds Sean Payton exactly of Drew Brees.
Yes. Yes.
That's the basis for the judgment. Which of the two, in Sean Payton's mind, from 23 to 24, will look like Drew Brees or more like Drew Brees? Russell Wilson has already been excluded as an option. The only option left is Bo Nix. It sure as hell isn't Jarrett Stidham or Zach Wilson.
No, absolutely not.
About whom you will be reading and hearing, I imagine, not from us, but from others, a great deal between now and late July.
Yeah, and some sort of, quarterback competition. There is no competition. This is, John Elway used to say it, right? Plan B. We're going plan A. Plan A is the guy you drafted. There's no plan B. This is the guy you drafted first overall. So, back in 2000, we'll give the first full year in which he started because that first year, 2001 with the Chargers back in San Diego, Drew Brees played in only one game and didn't start any. That second year, however, he started all 16. He threw for 3,284 yards, 17 touchdowns to 16 interceptions. Now, of course, over the course of his career, that would get a lot better. But that number, and that was in 2002. Offenses have exploded since then. That's got to be a bare minimum 60.8% completion, which is just about what Wilson had last year. 3,284 yards, 17 touchdowns. Those are makeable by Bo Nix. Doesn't mean he's going to turn into Hall of Famer Drew Brees, but those are numbers that he should exceed this year. And he should exceed with relative simplicity as long as he remains healthy and the Broncos offense, for the most part, remains whole.
One other assurance I will make. There will not be a game that the Broncos lose this year in which afterwards Sean Payton will place the kind of blame he placed on Russell Wilson last year, this year on Bo Nix. That's another assurance I think we both can offer the listening public.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this situation with Nix, I have to admit I'm not only curious about it, Sandy, but I'm a little optimistic because I've long believed that the NFL draft is about fit. It's about fit. It's about the right fit for players. And I think the teams that do understand that and draft for fit have a little more success. You can say what you will about the Broncos under Sean Payton in his last two drafts, but he's clearly drafted for fit over what necessarily people look at. They say, oh, this person's a this round prospect or whatever. He's looking for his own fit. I do think that's the right approach. And that's why I do think that Bo Nix can surprise because he's older. He's more experienced. He has guys that he's familiar with. Remember that center Alex Forsythe played with him as well with Oregon, and Forsythe is supposedly going to be in the mix for the starting center role, but he has guys that are friends. And when you talk about that middle part of the field, let me give you this from Pro Football Focus, Sandy. 114 targets to Troy Franklin from Nix. 71.1% of the time they were completed and 538 yards after the catch. 258 of his receiving yards on the year were on passes shorter than 10 yards. Exactly what Sean Payton wants to see.
Who was the last Bronco coach? Our final little bit of quizzing for today. Who was the last Bronco head coach who was clearly in love with his rookie quarterback?
In love with his rookie quarterback?
Yep. It happened during this century. It was a few years ago, but it did happen during this century.
Well, Gary Kubiak liked Trevor Siemian, didn't love Trevor Siemian.
No.
Certainly not as a rookie.
He did not. He did not love him.
Okay. Go on.
Mike Shanahan loved Jay Cutler in 2006.
Yep.
This is the first time since then that a head coach has loved his rookie quarterback. John Fox did not love Tim Tebow.
No, even though
Gary Kubiak did not love Peyton Manning in 2015. John Fox loved Peyton Manning in 2011, 12, 13, and even 14, but Peyton Manning was hardly a rookie at that point. The last time was 18 years ago that you had a head coach and a rookie quarterback who were simpatico.
OTAs continue this week. We'll talk more about that as the week goes along. Thanks to Ryan Blackburn for joining us, of course, breaking down the financial issues that will challenge the Nuggets going forward, especially if Kentavious Caldwell-Pope opts out. Make sure you check out Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on social. Thanks to Danny Bailey for putting this all together. Thanks to you, however you listen to the program. We really appreciate you tuning in. All of the comments on the YouTube channel, we see you. We'll get to you as well. For Sandy Clough, I'm Shawn Drotar. We'll be back next time. This is Mile High Sports.